At first, he didn't pay attention, not because he didn't notice, but because the strangeness arrived gently, concealed beneath the weight of moving boxes, unfamiliar shadows, and that peculiar emptiness that lives in freshly painted rooms where no memories yet exist. The bathroom mirror had been there since the beginning, tall and narrow, fixed above the chipped white sink in a space just wide enough for one person to turn around in. It didn't look unusual, just slightly foggy around the edges, the kind of imperfection you'd expect from a mirror exposed too long to steam and silence. The light above it flickered faintly, but not enough to be considered broken. The first time he raised his hand to his face and saw the reflection follow with a breath's delay, he blamed the lighting, fatigue, or perhaps the aging glass. He didn't stop to examine it, not yet. But it happened again the next night, and then the one after, always subtle, always just enough to unsettle. He would lift his hand, and his reflection would mimic the motion just a split second later, not enough to convince anyone else if they'd been watching, but too distinct to ignore when you're the only person in the apartment and the reflection is yours alone. The glass did not ripple. The surface did not flicker. There was no cinematic distortion, no overt signal of wrongness, only the unnerving realization that what you saw was not quite a copy, not quite delayed, but deliberate. As the days passed, he began to test it, casually at first, moving his arms at irregular angles, twisting suddenly at the waist, blinking rapidly, tapping his fingers against his neck, and every time, the reflection followed, only slightly out of sync, not like a glitch, but like someone trying very hard to match a routine they had only recently learned. It was not slow. It was not broken. It was watching. And worst of all, it was improving. The rest of the apartment felt normal, if that word still held meaning, with its thin walls, faded wooden floors, and that constant muted silence that comes from living in a space too long abandoned by sound. But the mirror remained a presence, not just an object. He began to avoid it during the day, keeping his head down when passing the bathroom, brushing his teeth with his eyes closed, shaving less often, letting the ritual of self-observation erode into avoidance. Still, the awareness grew. He no longer had to look to feel it. The mirror watched when he wasn't watching. Then, one night, walking down the hallway with a glass of water in hand, he passed the large standing mirror that hung just across from the front door. It had come with the apartment, mounted securely into the drywall, too large to move and too flush to cover. He hadn't thought much about it, until he saw, in his peripheral vision, that the version of himself inside the frame had not kept pace. It lagged, not by time, but by choice. He stopped. Turned his head. His reflection was already turned, facing him directly, not in aggression, not in warning, but in quiet, measured attention. Its face was calm. Too calm. And its posture was identical to his, but somehow firmer, more rooted, like it had planted itself there with intention. He backed away slowly, never taking his eyes off the mirror. The reflection matched his motion this time, in perfect unison, as if it had decided to return to the script, to reassure him just enough to keep the game going. He placed the glass of water on the side table by the couch and sat in silence, listening to the faint tick of the pipes behind the walls, the settling of the ceiling above, the aching pause in the room around him that no longer felt unoccupied. The following morning, the reflection behaved as it should. No delay. No twitch. No hesitation. It mimicked every motion without flaw, not because the problem had vanished, but because it had grown patient. The mirror no longer seemed eager to show him its divergence. Now it waited. Now it studied him. And even though he stood motionless before the glass, breathing slowly, watching the image return his gaze with that perfectly rehearsed stare, he couldn't stop seeing it, the moment from the night before, that fraction of delay, that half-second too long, that undeniable sensation that what lived behind the glass wasn't a reflection at all. It was learning. He no longer trusted his own face. Not in photographs, not in shop windows, not even in the flickering reflection off the surface of a spoon, each glance a brief, electric reminder that something familiar had begun to wear the shape of his features with increasing precision, and yet without ownership. The mirror did not lie anymore, it didn't need to. It obeyed the choreography of imitation so well that the smallest misstep had become more jarring than any monstrous reveal. When he lifted his hand now, it followed without flaw, but the moment passed too quickly, the angle too smooth, the stillness between movements too practiced, like a performer who had grown bored with his audience and was beginning to explore variations on the role. He tried removing the mirrors. Not just the one in the bathroom, but every reflective surface in the apartment. The large hallway piece was covered first, then the black screen of the TV, the microwave door, the glass and picture frames, even the water in the toilet, which began to shimmer unsettlingly in certain lights. He spent hours sealing them off, blankets, duct tape, cardboard, even aluminum foil, until the apartment looked like a condemned unit or a bunker hastily assembled for a paranoid recluse. For a brief moment, silence returned. He could breathe again. He could move through rooms without feeling a second pair of eyes walking half a step behind his own. But that peace was brief. And when it ended quietly. The first sign was a noise, not loud, not mechanical, but an almost inaudible scraping sound, like skin dragged slowly across glass. He heard it first from behind the sealed bathroom door, faint but rhythmic, like fingers tapping in thought. The mirror had been covered for 2 days. He hadn't stepped foot inside since. But now, the scratching came every evening, always starting just after dusk, always stopping the moment he approached the door. He thought of tearing the blanket down, confronting whatever was behind it, proving to himself that there was nothing there, just warped reflection and tired imagination. But he couldn't. Not because he was afraid of what he might see, but because he was afraid it might see him too clearly. The second sign was stranger. One night, as he lay in bed, still, eyes closed, arms wrapped tightly across his chest, he opened his eyes to find the faint shimmer of movement in the dark corner of the room, near the closet where no mirror had ever hung. There was no light, no source of reflection, but in that shifting gray he could make out the silhouette of a figure, not standing, not advancing, but adjusting, as though trying to decide how best to fit into the available space. It didn't move like a body. It moved like a memory of movement, something practiced and performed 1,000 times without purpose. He blinked, and the corner was empty again. But from then on, he began waking up in positions he didn't remember falling asleep in, always facing away from the walls, always with his hands tucked neatly beneath his spine. On the 12th day, the reflections came back. Not in mirrors, those remained covered, untouched, but in windows. Even without light, even with curtains drawn tight, he began to see faint traces of himself on the glass. Not real reflections. Not optical. Just suggestions. A shoulder where there shouldn't be one. A tilt of the head that did not match his own. And the worst of them all, the mouth. It smiled. Not constantly, not in every pain, but often enough that he stopped looking out altogether. It was never a grin. Never cruel. Just a quiet, knowing smile, patient, steady, faintly amused, as though whatever wore his face now understood something he hadn't yet realized. He no longer spoke aloud in the apartment. His own voice had started to sound foreign to him, like a recording of someone trying to remember how he used to sound. Even his breath seemed to echo differently, returning from the walls with a rhythm that didn't feel like his own. It was as though the apartment had grown a second heartbeat, slow and smooth and entirely unafraid. He tried leaving once more, coat on, keys in hand, but found himself standing before the mirror in the entryway, uncovered again, perfectly clean, perfectly still. He hadn't removed the foil. He hadn't touched the tape. And yet the mirror stood exposed. And he was already inside it. Not his reflection. Not a mirrored version. Him. Standing inside the glass with perfect posture, arms at his sides, face calm, mouth closed, gaze steady. Not smiling this time, just watching. But when he turned away, he realized his body hadn't moved. He remained frozen. Only the world around him had shifted. He could feel his limbs, but they no longer responded. He could blink, but only inside the mirror. And as the reflection on the outside, the version of him now standing in the hallway, turned and walked slowly away from the glass, He felt the frame close behind him with the quiet finality of something ancient and well-practiced. He screamed, but the sound did not pass the glass. He moved, but the image did not ripple. From now on, every mirror in every apartment would show a version of him that moved on time, breathed on time, smiled on time. But none of them would be him. Because the glass had finally caught up.